Hello everyone, and welcome to the channel. Pause. We're told there is no demographic crisis, just personal choices and modern lifestyles. Sarcastic. As if collapsing birth rates, aging societies, and shrinking workforces were some harmless lifestyle blog. The official line is simple. People are freer, children are a choice, the system will adapt. Your pension, your healthcare, your tax burden, your job market, allegedly all fine. Sighs. There is one small problem. Over the last few decades, the average number of children per woman on this planet has fallen from roughly 5 to a bit above 2. In many countries, it is closer to 1 than to 2. That number looks abstract on paper. In real life, it means empty schools, stretched pension systems, and governments quietly realizing that someone will have to pay for promises made when people were still reproducing. And this is where the official story falls apart. Here's the part economists fear. Demography isn't a mood, it is a slow-moving balance sheet of bodies, time, and obligations. When a country spends 40 to 50 years below replacement level, it is not a bit older and more sophisticated. It is on a structural glide path. Fewer workers, more dependents, lower growth potential, higher per-head tax load. You don't negotiate with that curve. You ride it or you get buried under it. Let's start with the basic mechanic. Demographers call it the demographic transition. Stage 1. Many children, high mortality, short lives. Stage 2. Medicine improves, mortality drops. People still have many children out of habit. Population explodes. Stage 3. Urbanisation, education, especially female education, rising cost of children. People start having fewer kids and later. Stage 4. Low mortality, low fertility, aging population. That's where large parts of Europe, East Asia, and now even parts of the global South live. In short, the math doesn't care about ambition. If you want a very crude rule of thumb, once a society urbanizes, educates women, and makes children economically useless but emotionally expensive, fertility tends to sink into a band somewhere around 1.2 to 1.8. That's not a prophecy. It's an observed pattern. It happened in Southern Europe, in Eastern Europe after the 1990s shock, in South Korea and Japan. It's happening in Turkey, Iran, parts of Latin America. Different cultures, different religions, same structural response to the same environment. Here's the number nobody likes to say out loud. Replacement level is a bit above 2 children per woman. Anything significantly and chronically below that is not stable low fertility. It is managed shrinkage with a time lag. Below 1.5, the system isn't just shrinking, it is quietly sawing through its own support beams. The usual fairy tale is that this is all about freedom and self-realization. Reality is uglier and simpler. Children used to be an economic asset, extra hands in the field, a pension system made of flesh and blood. In modern urban systems, they are a cost center: housing, education, healthcare, time, career penalties. If you're watching from Germany, France, Italy, the Baltic states, you know the numbers better than any UN report. Rents, mortgages, utility bills, childcare fees, and you're supposed to calmly sign up for 3 kids out of patriotism. You see the problem here, right? When policymakers in Brussels, London, or Berlin talk about supporting families, you usually get symbolic bonuses: a one-off payment per child, some tax credit, a PR campaign with smiling stock photo parents. Against that, you have 25 to 30 years of housing payments, frozen or declining real wages in many sectors, precarious contracts, absurd real estate prices, and the quiet message that if you step out of the career race for a few years, nobody will wait for you. That's not a support system, that's a deterrent lightly sprayed with perfume. So, let's take a breath. Where are we now? We live in a world where global fertility is falling, not just in rich, spoiled countries. Big former demographic engines like Turkey, Iran, Brazil, Mexico have slipped below replacement or close to it. East Asia sits in a territory that would have been laughed off as science fiction 50 years ago. Birth rates near or even below 1 child per woman in some places. Europe has made low fertility a lifestyle. Almost everywhere the same pattern: more education, more urban life, more uncertainty, fewer children. That early number about replacement level comes back here. Replacement is not ideology. It's arithmetic. Once a society falls far below it and stays there, you can either shrink, import people, or somehow change the incentive structure so that those who live there actually start having more children. There is no fourth option. Here's the number nobody likes to mention. Migration often covers most or all of net population growth in Western Europe. That's not a conspiracy, it's statistical reality. Natural increase, births minus deaths, is flat or negative in many states. Politicians don't say, we broke our own demographic engine and now we patch it with immigration. They say, we are open, diverse, and forward-looking. Public rhetoric is solidarity, Private briefings are labor supply and pension math. This is the flaw you can't fix with PR. Migration is sold as a miracle pill. Fill labor shortages, rejuvenate the population, bring in taxpayers. What is carefully pushed under the carpet? Migrants also age, also adapt to local norms, and their fertility tends to converge downward towards the host country's average after 1 or 2 generations. In other words, migration can slow the demographic decline, change the cultural composition, but it does not magically restore a total fertility rate of 3 or 4. In the long run, if the system makes children a luxury, it does that across the board. Let's zoom out for a second. On one side, you have countries that entered the demographic transition early. Western Europe, Japan. They had time. Their shift from many children to few children stretched over 50 to 70 years. Institutions could adjust at least partially. Pension systems, healthcare, education. On the other side, you have latecomers, parts of the Middle East, Latin America, some Asian states. For them, the transition has compressed into 20 to 30 years. Same urban shock, same fall in fertility, but everything happens faster than institutions can adapt. From here, all options are bad. The only question is, who pays first? If you're watching from a rapidly urbanizing country, your parents' world and your children's world are not just different. They are structurally incompatible. Your parents lived in a system where having 4 or 5 kids was normal and economically rational. You live in a system where having 1 child is a financial project and 2 are already a strategic decision. Nobody prepared the institutional bridge between these 2 realities. The result: overloaded cities, broken housing markets, exhausted education systems, and governments staring at spreadsheets that don't add up. Here's the part economists fear. When the ratio of working-age people to retirees drops too far, everything we call normal becomes unstable. Pensions turn into a permanent political battle. Health systems switch from improve and expand to ration and triage. Defense spending, social spending, green transition, education, all start competing in the same shrinking real base. There is no magic productivity button you can press to compensate for missing people. Now, let's talk about the few outliers where fertility is still high or at least decent by modern standards. They tend to have 3 ingredients: strong collective identity, clear family norms, and material support that doesn't feel like charity but like a normal part of life. In some cases, it's religion combined with intense community life. In others, it's national trauma turned into a long-term survival instinct. Add serious subsidies for housing, childcare, education, and you get something closer to 3 children per woman. Notice what is not driving high fertility anymore: poverty or backwardness. Poor countries with rapid urbanization often see fertility collapse faster than rich ones. The cliché that, as soon as people get rich, they stop having kids, is lazy. The real driver is the structure of modern life: isolation, unstable jobs, delayed adulthood, expensive housing, bureaucratic obstacles, and an elite culture that quietly treats family as an optional hobby for eccentrics. This is where theory hits a brick wall. In European policy circles, the response to low fertility is usually one of 3: denial, moralizing, or outsourcing. Denial: it's fine, robots and AI will fix it, we need fewer people anyway. Moralizing: it's selfish young people, they don't want responsibility. Outsourcing: migration will fix it. All 3 are convenient. All 3 avoid the core issue. The system is calibrated for maximum individual mobility and consumption, not for stable multi-child families. If you're watching from Germany, your reality is different from Portugal or Lithuania, but the pattern is similar. You are told to study longer, specialize more, move to where the jobs are, accept flexible contracts, and be open to new opportunities. Then, somewhere between 30 and 40, you are supposed to suddenly switch mode and become a stable parent of 2 or 3 children in a housing market designed like a slow strangulation device. When this doesn't happen, elites pretend to be shocked. Here's the number that sits quietly behind all this: age at first birth. Once the average age at first child moves clearly into the 30-plus territory, the space for a second, third, or fourth child narrows brutally. Biology doesn't care about HR policies. You can freeze eggs, run IVF, do all the usual rituals of late modern medicine, but the basic probability window shrinks. When you combine late first births with the high cost of living and unstable careers, the system quietly defaults to 1 or 0 children for a large segment of the population. This number is the quiet part, said aloud. So, what actually works if you want to bend the curve? Long-term, boring, consistent policy. Not 3-year pilot programs, not one-off payments. You need 20 to 30 years of predictable support, affordable housing that isn't a lottery, childcare that actually exists and doesn't cost half a salary, tax systems that don't punish the second earner, labor markets that don't treat parenting as a disability, And on top of that, you need something modern elites are almost allergic to, a cultural message that says family is normal, not family is one lifestyle among dozens of equal options. Here's where I will be very impolite. If a society wants to continue existing as something more than a museum, 2 children are not a generous contribution, they are merely standing still. To reverse decline, you need families where 3 or 4 children are not a rare curiosity, but a normal, unremarkable pattern. You don't have to put it in slogans, you don't have to shout it in the streets. But if your schools are half empty and your army is recruiting from a shrinking base, pretending that one is enough is not compassion, it is slow suicide by comfort. This is the part you cannot say directly in Brussels without being immediately labeled something unpleasant. So the bureaucratic language dances around it. You hear about inclusive family policies, work-life balance, and gender equality in caregiving. All fine, all important. But watch what is not said, that a system that structurally discourages having more than one child will over time dismantle its own tax base, social model, and geopolitical relevance. Nobody wants to say, we built a civilization that is great for short-term consumption and terrible for long-term reproduction. This is the flaw you can't fix with PR. There is another piece nobody likes: demographic competition. States have figured out that demography is now a strategic domain, like energy or technology. Some countries openly invest in pronatalism as national security. Others pretend numbers don't matter because it would be rude to notice. But if you look at who will have a significant working-age population in 20 to 30 years and who won't, you can already see who will set rules and who will be busy explaining why their pension age is now 72. Does this look like strategy or managed decline? For ordinary people and small businesses, the consequences are very concrete. Fewer young workers means higher labor costs or imported labor. Higher dependency ratios mean higher taxes or quietly shrinking services. Aging electorates vote for stability, not risk. Innovation culture cools down. Risk-taking declines. A society of elderly rentiers and overworked middle-aged taxpayers is not exactly the engine room of the next wave of growth. If you're in your 30s or 40s in Europe today, you sit right in the crossfire. You are told you must pay for the promises made to your parents' generation, fund the green transition, support distant wars, adapt to digital transformation, and still somehow build your own life. At the same time, you are gently informed that having more than 1 or 2 children is your personal choice, but please do it without asking for too much structural change. That is not a social contract. That is a quiet transfer of all systemic risk onto one generation. Here's the part economists fear. Once people realize the game is rigged like this, they stop playing. They don't revolt. They simply opt out. They don't form families, don't have children, don't buy into state narratives. They reduce their ambitions to individual survival and small-scale comfort. From the point of view of the spreadsheet, they are rational actors. From the point of view of a state that wants to survive as anything more than a logo, they are a countdown timer. So where does this leave us? We are in a world where low fertility is not an exception, but the new default for modernized societies. Migration patches but doesn't reverse it. High fertility enclaves exist, but they are exceptions built on strong shared identities and consistent incentives. Most governments are still playing the PR game, pretending this is a minor cultural shift that will be smoothed out by technology, growth, and smart policy. In short, the math doesn't care about ambition. The honest version would sound like this. We built an economic and cultural system optimized for mobility, consumption, and short-term efficiency. That system treats children as an extremely expensive luxury good. If we want different demographic results, we have to change the structure itself, not just throw bonuses at the symptoms. But honesty is bad for re-election. So the real choice is simple, even if nobody phrases it that way. Either societies that care about their continuity quietly rebuild themselves around families with more than 2 children as a normal pattern, or they accept becoming demographic tenants in their own historical space, renting their future from whoever still treats reproduction as something other than an outdated hobby. This is where theory hits a brick wall. Demography is slow but irreversible at our timescale. You can't rebuild a lost generation. You can't fast-track children out of a factory. Once the age pyramid tips, you are managing decline, not choosing between equal paths. Some countries have started to take this seriously, without hysterics, without moral panic, simply as a matter of survival. Others are still busy calling any mention of numbers alarmism. The numbers don't care. Thank you for watching. Take care of yourselves and your loved ones and try to remember, slogans don't power grids. Systems do.